Well, good morning, friends. We come today to part 3 of 4 parts exploring the Old Testament book of Hosea. And if in part 1 and 2 we were really exploring the first section, largely dealing with Hosea and Gomer and God telling Hosea to take Gomer as his wife and to continue being faithful to her even though she was unfaithful to him. Now in part 2, chapters 4 to 11, we really deal with this from Yahweh's perspective and his relationship with Israel. We're no longer in that story of Hosea and Gomer. And we've jumped forward quite a few chapters here. We've jumped right forward from chapter 3 last week through to chapter 11. Because chapter 11 in many ways is the summary chapter. In a similar way that chapter 3 was the summary chapter for chapters 1 to 3, chapters 4 to 11 have a summary chapter found within chapter 11, dealing with Israel's unfaithfulness and also Yahweh's continued faithfulness in pursuing and redeeming his people. And as I was reading this, one of the things that struck me was how there is such a great tendency for Israel to lose faith and to lose their trust in Yahweh to provide, and to think that they can find that sense of security in other things, in other nations around them, in other deities, and even if that means going back to slavery in Egypt. And what we find is that there is a capacity within all of us, not just within Israel, but within you and I, within our hearts, to actually entrench ourselves again and again in that space of slavery, to whatever that looks like. Whenever we choose to turn away from God and resting in the fact that He will take care of us and He will provide, and our security ultimately comes from Him, and thinking falsely that we can find that security in other things, whatever it is within our life. And so as you read this chapter, as you come across God's continual pursuit for Israel in bringing them back into relationship with Him, as you come across Israel's capacity to turn away from Yahweh, falsely thinking that they can find security within other nations, within even other deities, but ultimately going back to slavery. As you read that, I want you to consider, just as I have to consider, where is it that I am likely to do the same thing within my own life? Where is it that we are likely to turn away from trusting in God and finding our security within Him and falsely believing that we can find that security in other things? Maybe it's not in worshipping other deities as such, but maybe it is within the pursuit for earthly desires, good things that we make great, in thinking if only we can gain this, we can be secure. And what we find is, just like Israel, we end up becoming enslaved to those things. Once again, we're actually taken to the story of the prodigal son. That story is one which we find again and again and again throughout Scripture in many different ways and elements. And here Israel is brought back to their Father, their Creator, now their Redeemer. And we find most of all here that it is not because of their doing that they find reconciliation, but it is Yahweh's work in bringing them back to Him. And so, my friends, I hope that we might take great comfort that we might take also instruction from this passage as we wrestle with where are we likely to turn to as we turn away from God and maybe turn to the pursuit of earthly things to find our security, but also that we might find comfort. That this is the reminder of the story of the prodigal son, but also, more importantly, of the God who redeems, and the God who makes the first step, of the God who calls his people into the wilderness and woos them back to him, brings them back into relationship with him to find their security, their trust, their identity in his presence, rather than being enslaved to the things of this world.